say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave? Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has brought us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Please give a warm round of applause for the Howard University Bison Battalion and Nia Aiana Meeks for a wonderful opening to this morning's National Town Hall. Please welcome to the stage the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and the U.S. representative from the ever-resilient state of Texas, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Oh, that is not good enough. Good morning, my brothers and sisters. Full of the faith that the dark past has brought us. We will march on until victory is won. I welcome you on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. You are at the 47th Annual Legislative Conference, a conference that you could not afford to miss, and be reminded, and still I rise. I welcome you again, and delighted that you have come, for the focus of today's discussion is fighting the systemic destruction of our civil rights. It is very timely, it is urgent, and I am confident that we'll have a productive discussion. Early this morning, I was at one of our missions for homeless men here in Washington, D.C., along with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation spouses. I said to them, we must live with hope. But when you see individuals where the system has failed them, where there is no future, then you know that we have to stand in the gap. I did not leave them with that thought. They are deserving of dignity like everyone else. But when you deny a man or woman civil rights, you take away their life, their dignity, and their future. In the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and the Congressional Black Caucus, we are not going to allow that to happen. I'm pleased to see that we have a multi-generational audience in the room this morning. The folks from my generation, young, understand firsthand what it means to gain representation in our democracy. We are painfully aware of the sacrifices that were made to bring our nation closer to making real its values of freedom, equality, and justice for all. We do not deny that those who are in the millennium generation and those who will come after do not understand and will not be embedded with that source of soulness that they will understand too. But it is our challenge to make it real. Right now, there is a dangerous undercurrent in this nation in which some would like to roll back our progress and the rights and opportunities of other marginalized populations, from Muslims to immigrants to African Americans, Hispanics, women, people of different views, different orientation, different faith. That will not stand in this nation, and we should not allow it to stand. These ideas are derived from fear, ignorance, and the short-sighted notion that prosperity for one group must be achieved or maintained by subordinating other groups. I'm here to tell you that we as a people are not going backwards ever again. Furthermore, we as a nation can do better than this. If you're listening, Attorney General Sessions, you may hold a post of the person who is supposed to be the man of justice. But we will determine the justice of ourselves, and we will determine and ensure and make that you do not undermine the justice that we deserve. You will not snatch our civil rights and our bloodline away from us ever again, no matter which Southern democracy that you claim you may have come from. We can build an American society that supports the needs and aspirations of everyone within it. As African Americans, we have had to make moral leadership during critical points in the nation's history. During the Civil Rights Movement, for example, we had a peaceful movement that forced this nation to begin to live up to its stated principles. No one will ever not say that we are not law-abiding, that we do not respect, that we are abiding by the laws, but we want the laws to abide by us. If necessary, we can and we will do that movement again, as has already been done by so many movements that have stood up and stood in the gap. You will hear from two of our pioneers who put in their work and continue to serve us to this day. Young people, we are excited about your energy and your commitment to propel the next phase of government. We know you're coming and you will move government forward. I'm asking that every one of you in this room and those watching on TV and online to engage your peers, to get involved and amplify your voices loudly and clearly. Did you hear me? Amplify your voices loudly and clearly. I don't hear you. Are you going to amplify those voices? Now, not only must we push back against the assaults on our rights and, frankly, the almost deadly effort to everything we know to be good and right, we must keep driving this movement forward, all of us together. We cannot take for granted the blood, oh the blood, oh the blood, the sweat and tears of our elders and our ancestors that endured so that we could not only survive, that we would one day begin to thrive. We cannot take for granted brothers that we've lost in the streets through the hands of those who wish to take away the life of our young brothers and leave mothers mourning. We know the roll call. We cannot let them down. I am optimistic that our participation in this town hall will be well spent, for we'll give you the tools to embolden you and strengthen you. I know that this will be the catalyst for the collective action in months to come, legislation that is being driven by the Congressional Black Caucus and those who think well all throughout the Congress, our Democratic leadership and others that will make a difference. I'm very pleased with the distinguished panelists we have assembled here this morning, and I want to take just a moment to acknowledge and thank them for being here with us. It is, of course, you will have two very special guests that will be specially introduced in just a few minutes. I'm so excited about that chat. But on our panel, we have Ms. Vanita Gupta of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the President and CEO. We have Ms. Tamika D. Mallory from the Women's March on Washington and formerly with the National Action Network. Cleola Brown of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, and Clarence E. Cox of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, former Chief of Police of Clayton, Georgia, who tell it like it is. Thank you, all of you, for making the time to participate in this very timely discussion. I look forward to joining you on this panel, along with my colleague, Congressman Vesey, who is also the ALC co-chair, along with Robin Kelly. On a related note, I want to give special thanks to our sponsor of this event. Very much want to give them thanks to the Service Employees International Union. Would you give them a hand, please? Organized labor movements have taught us over decades, as I said to them backstage, about the power of unity, the necessity of fairness, the values in compromise, and the collaboration. So we are so very happy to have your support, but also to have the SEIU as our thought partners. Before we get started, I want to make sure that we bring to the stage the leader of the organization that has brought us all together. And as I bring her to the stage, let me say a special note of thanks from those of us who were impacted by Hurricane Harvey. We are so grateful that the ALC has dedicated this ALC 47th annual time with all of you to the survivors of Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, and now Hurricane Maria. Before I left, I buried one of those valiant servants of the people who left in the midst of the storm and said, "I've got to get to work," and never made it. We lost so many, but I'm grateful that we are one and united, and we won't forget them ever. And that is because we have worked together with the woman who is leading the change and the charge to build and maintain the pipeline of leaders that will give voice to our agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, let's warmly welcome the President and CEO of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, Ms. A. Shanice Washington. Thank you all. Stand in the gap.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good morning to each of you. Good morning, and welcome. I'm so grateful for your presence here this morning for what I predict will be a passionate and thought-provoking series of discussions over the next 2 hours. The National Town Hall is an important part of CBCF's annual legislative conference as it brings together national thought leaders, policymakers, and change makers for a serious discussion about the state of the global Black community, our agenda, and the steps we must take to move it forward. The mission of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation is to advance the global Black community by developing leaders, informing policy, and educating the public. And one of the Foundation's most important functions is providing transformational leadership opportunities to the next and now generation of policymakers, thought leaders, and innovators. We accomplish this through our fellowship, internship, scholarship, and study abroad programs, which provide access to the halls of Congress, private sector companies, as well as learning about the policymaking process in other countries. There is no other pathway to this kind of access, and at this time in our country's history, there's hardly been a greater need to seed a new generation of public servants. Since the inception of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, we have placed thousands of interns, hundreds of public policy fellows, and we have dispersed tens of millions of dollars in scholarship funds. Thank you for supporting this conference as it enables us to continue the important work we undertake to include convening nearly 10,000 people each September to discuss those issues most critical to the global Black community. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to the 2016-2018 cohort of Public Policy Fellows. Priscilla Barber, who is currently serving on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, Energy and Environment subcommittees. Zoe Kador, serving with the American Petroleum Institute. Alexandrine DeBianche, serving on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, Democratic staff. Abdul Dinsi, United States Agency for International Development, USAID, Power Africa Division. Ronald Madlock, serving with the Senate Subcommittee on Regulatory Affairs and Federal Management. Aaron Robinson, House Committee on Education and the Workforce. And Kimberly Toots, House Committee on Education and the Workforce as well. I encourage you to connect with them during the conference and learn about the CBCF Leadership Institute and their experiences. And I also ask that you consider supporting these programs by making a contribution to the CBC Foundation through one of our giving programs. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. There's an opportunity to contribute that's a win-win opportunity, and it's with one of our partners, Uber, the ride-sharing app. They are supporting the annual legislative conference by offering a discount to users who use the CBCF ALC 2017 discount code. CBCF ALC 2017 discount code. Each time you take Uber using the code, they will make a donation to CBCF. So please be sure and put it in your phone now and have it ready when you leave the convention center. And that code will be active through Sunday. I would also like to express a heartfelt appreciation to SEIU for their sponsorship of this National Town Hall event, which not only helps us bring all of us together, but also supports the Foundation's program. And importantly, thank each of you. Thank you for investing your time and resources to be here this week and for your participation in the discussions. It not only signals that you understand your civic responsibility, but you also have a sense of what is at stake and importantly committed to driving our collective mission. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to bring up the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. He is indeed a champion for the Black agenda in Congress and for the policies and actions that can enable our communities to grow and thrive. He hails from New Orleans, Louisiana, a city that understands all too well how crises can devastate communities, but also brings out the humanity, selflessness, and courage in people. This favored son of New Orleans is a well-seasoned, pardon the pun, to lead in the face of the challenges we face as a political collective. We are all thankful for his leadership and his bold voice in Congress. Please give a warm welcome to Congressman Cedric Richmond.
Let me say thank you to Ms. Washington for your kind introduction. I believe I can say on behalf of all the members of the Congressional Black Caucus that we appreciate your leadership and the partnership we enjoy with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. To my colleague, Sheila Jackson Lee, we watch with special appreciation your strength and perseverance alongside your Houston community during and after devastation of Hurricane Harvey. You know the folks from my hometown of New Orleans, we've been there, we've done that, and we thank you for your generosity and all of that of the people of Houston for welcoming us to their city and taking care of our victims of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. So we really appreciate it, and we are here for you. And good morning, and welcome to all of you. I'm always excited to be with our constituents, all of you who have come from near and far to share, to listen, to network, and to strategize around our national agenda. This annual legislative conference and events like this National Town Hall are so important because they offer a very unique opportunity for the Congressional Black Caucus to bring together our heroes and our thought leaders to focus our hearts and minds on our collective agenda. The alarming rise in hate rhetoric and crimes and attempts to normalize white supremacy language, but more importantly, related policy, will not be left unchecked by us. We must treat these occurrences in the same way we respond to other national crises. We must band together, leverage our allies, and activate all of our resources, including, but certainly not limited to, getting everyone committed to vote in every election. Our unified participation in policymaking can move us closer to access and equity that we must have in order to progress. We know well that when we have equity and opportunity, public health and safety, justice, education, and economic justice, when we are free to prosper and thrive, our nation will also thrive and reach its full potential. I'm looking forward to the many discussions, ideas, and the inspiration that will come from today's town hall discussion and from the events to follow all over the weekend. We are listening, we are learning, and we will undoubtedly be energized to keep fighting the good fight on behalf of you, our constituents, and to uphold our responsibility as the conscience of the Congress. Our ancestors and elders have invested a great deal in this nation, and our young people should inherit and multiply the fruits of that labor. I'm eager for us to get the conversation started, so I'm going to get out of the way, but first I want you to hear briefly from two of my colleagues. They're also the co-chairs of this annual legislative conference. They have been instrumental in putting together the agenda for this conference, bringing us all here to address the myriad of issues that need our focus and our attention. So at this time, please help me bring up the co-chairs of the Congressional Black Caucus's 47th Annual Legislative Conference, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, representing the 2nd District in Illinois, and Congressman Mark Vesey, representing the 33rd District in Texas. Thank you, and give them a round of applause.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Richmond, for all of your work on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus, and thank you for your commitment to empowering communities of color and confronting the powers and obstacles that stand in the way of equality and justice for so many people of color. Welcome and good morning to all of you attending the 47th Congressional Black Caucus Annual Legislative Conference. Whether you are here in person or watching online, thank you for caring enough to get involved. As my friend and our former President Barack Obama once put it, we are the change we seek. And that's exactly why we are here today. We are the sparks of resistance, reform, and resilience that this nation relies on. The annual legislative conference is and will always remain the annual meeting place for architects of change. It is where we can convene on behalf of our respective communities and make a difference through the strength of our ideas. And that's what this nation needs: strength, ideas, and change. Elections matter. Ideas matter. And right now we can see, feel, and hear how big of a difference an election can make. The ALC is going to feel a lot different than last year's ALC, but this country feels a lot different today than it did last year. But we are the change we seek, and no matter what obstacle, what policy, what presidency we face, yet still we will rise. There is a fierce urgency right now. We have a new mission that begins this week. Let's be bold, let's be purposeful. Let's not let an opportunity pass us by or a moment go to waste to make the change that we need right now. And this morning's National Town Hall is the perfect beginning to do just that. Let me thank my co-chair for this year, ALC's Congressman Mark Veazey from Texas. I am thankful for your partnership as my co-chair of this conference. Is there anything you'd like to say this morning?
Absolutely. Thank you, Robin. And it's so energizing to be here with you, our colleagues, constituents, and community leaders to focus on a national agenda that's very important to us. The fact that all of you are here this morning, full of energy, right? Full of energy and ready to engage, tells us something about your mindset and your commitment. Are you ready to put yourself in tough conversations and places so that you can be part of the solution? I'm lucky to be among you and inspired to do more and push harder on those days when the fight for justice is a steep uphill battle. As co-chair of this year's conference, I encourage you to fully engage in the sessions and the networking opportunities and to think strategically about the fire that we can spark here in 2017. I'm asking you to believe in our ongoing process. I'm asking you to make a promise to yourself and your peers that you will not let that spark die when you go back to your neighborhoods and cities. And we are counting on you to support us and hold us accountable until we achieve the future we collectively envision for all of our communities. Thank you. Having a moderator is important, and our moderator for this panel is going to be Jeff Johnson. Jeff Johnson, the moderator.
Wow. All right. Thank you. That was the intro. Good morning. Good morning. It is fantastic to be here with you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jeff Johnson. I'm a communications specialist, a journalist, a bootleg activist, a servant that has worked with many of you in the room and has supported many of you. And more than anything, I am honored and privileged to be able to guide you through this conversation this morning. Where do I start? Because we're talking about fighting the systemic destruction of our civil rights. And if we didn't know that was timely, many of us can be reminded. When we talk about civil rights, we're talking about African American access to equity, education, criminal justice, public health, and representation through voting rights, among other issues. But when we talk about civil rights, I think even today, we need to deal with an antiquated narrative versus a current narrative. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of talking about civil rights and our movement through the lens of work that we should already have been, things we'd already been given, and survival versus power. And if we don't talk about power through ownership, power through equity, power through the ability to leverage that which this country has through prosperity, then we're still begging people to give us what we have helped this country earn. And so let's be clear. We will talk about equity as it relates to issues of policy. But if we're not talking about power, we're still being pimped, even in the name of moving towards what we claim we want. I know that makes some of you uncomfortable. I don't care. This morning, we're going to tackle questions around African American voting participation, the civic engagement of Black millennials, and the strategies and solutions to ensure that Black voices are heard and their interests are addressed. Still I Rise, which comes from the poet laureate, the late Maya Angelou, speaks to the fact that we have the ability to rise. But the question is, what are we going to rise to? What are we going to rise to do? Where will we rise to do it? Because if we're rising to mediocrity or rising to being comfortable or rising to be complacent, then we might as well stay down. I hope that we would merge because there is a poet laureate that some of you may know or may not know that hails from Chicago by the name of Chance the Rapper. And I just want to say, you don't want no problems with me. And if we rise and say you don't want no problems with me and show up at state legislatures and show up in Washington, D.C. and show up in our communities, then the enemy that we're fighting in white supremacy and the tenets of white supremacy understand that not only are we talking about rising, but we're mobilizing when we do. So, before we bring out the full panel, I'd like us to engage two long-serving, iconic leaders in the Congress. They're both universally respected. If you don't know them, you've been under a rock. But I think what is key is that both of these representatives not only are present when they're on the Hill and in their district, but they're recognized all over the country. Their years of service is not just about what they've done in the halls of Congress, but about young people that they have developed, about businesses that they've helped support, about people that they've pushed along the way, about what they did when nobody was watching. And that is the true testament of leadership. What do you do and who do you help when there is no press release, when there is no press conference, when there are no cameras? And these two represent stalwart leadership within the Congressional Black Caucus. First, he is an American hero who's been fighting for human dignity, liberty, and equal opportunity since he was a teenager on the front lines of the American Civil Rights Movement. He's a ranking member of the Oversight Subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee and the beloved representative from Georgia's 5th Congressional District. I don't know if we need to give him a warm round of applause. I think we need to give him a level of honor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman John Lewis. So, Congressman Lewis, the most challenging part of this conversation is that we have 15 minutes. And I know that that could be one question for you, with all respect.
That's okay, brother.
I'm so thankful to be here sitting with you, and I hope we can have a conversation in that short time and then take some questions from the audience. But I think what's interesting in this time is that events in Charlottesville and other parts of the country awoke people to the term white supremacy in a way like they forgot it existed. Can you talk for me a little bit about not the fact that this is white supremacy that ever went away, but we have to recognize there is an evolved white supremacy. What are the variances and the differences that you see between this mechanism of white supremacy that we're fighting in 2017 versus that you and many of your cohorts fought nearly 40 years ago?
Well, thank you very much for being you. Thank you for never, ever giving up or giving in, but for keeping the faith.
Thank you.
You know, some people really thought, and maybe some of us really dreamed, that when President Barack Obama was elected, it was the end of racism, that it was a new day, a better day. But when we had this most recent election, it helped create the climate, the environment, to bring out something that had been a little asleep. And people feel like now they can just get away with doing everything. What happened in Virginia made me very sad. We faced mobs. We faced the Klan. We faced overt, open racism during the 60s, during the Freedom Rides. In 1961, black people and white people could be seated together on a Greyhound bus, leaving Washington, D.C. to travel through the South. We were beaten. Attempted to burn us on a bus. We were left bloody and unconscious by angry mobs. When we attempted to march from Selma to Montgomery just for the right to vote, to protest in a peaceful, orderly, nonviolent fashion, we were beaten by the state police and left bloody and some unconscious. and some of our people died. After the March on Washington in 1963, there was so much hope and optimism, but 18 days later, a church was bombed in Birmingham where 4 little girls were killed on a Sunday morning. And what we see happening now, it's not new. The man that some people voted for just made it very comfortable for people to put on those hoods, put on those sheets. And I tell you, if we're not mindful or watchful, we're going to go back. We come too far, we made too much progress to go back. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward, and we must go forward.
Absolutely. When you mentioned that he made people brazen enough to put sheets back on, but there's a whole lot of people with suits on. And so when we look at the prison industrial complex and the fact that private prison stock went up 600% the day after Trump was elected, that speaks to more than folks marching through the streets with hoods on. That speaks to a systematic, market-driven slavery and white supremacy system. And so how do we fight that? Because clearly there's a way to combat words in the street. But when you start talking about private prisons who gave $500,000 to Trump's campaign and then another $500,000 to the inauguration, that's institutional at its highest level, and all of the profits are on the backs of our folks. So how do we, one, address that, not just the prison piece, but the broader corporate piece, and what are the tools that we have at our disposal to fight it?
We must organize. I think some of us have been asleep too long. We need to wake up. We need to use everything in our power, economic resources, but use the vote also. On election days, too many of us are staying at home. People died for the right to vote. The vote is precious. It's almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent instrument or tool we have in a democratic society, and we should use it. It doesn't make sense for us to have private prisons, not at the state level, the county level, or the federal level. They must be abolished. Shouldn't be making money, profits, off of the suffering and pain of people. It is wrong.
You just mentioned that people stay home on election day, and especially when we look at municipal races, you've got mayors that are being elected at single-digit turnout numbers, which literally should be illegal. But the challenge that I have is when the electorate, either one, isn't excited about their options. Number two, they're being asked to vote based on the past versus the future. And so I agree with you about how much was given for us to vote and the lives that were lost. But when I go to the polls, I'm voting for my children, not for my grandparents. And so how do we change the narrative where we don't discount all of the work that was done by you and many others to get us here, but we cast a vision of what's possible with that vote and what our vote is worth, versus asking young people to vote for a history that often we haven't taught them?
Well, we must vote for the present and for the future. We have to use it. We got to educate and inspire people to stand up. And I said to my colleagues, and it doesn't matter whether they're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American, that when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have an obligation to do something, to say something. We're just too darn quiet. I really want to use some other words sometime. And, I believe in the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, but sometimes I feel like taking a bullwhip and just saying to people, you get your butt up. You go out there and do what you must do. More young people, more women, but especially young men and women must get involved in the political arena and run for office. Become fighters, become warriors. We didn't wait until we were 50 and 60 and 70 years old. There were young children marching in Birmingham, in Selma, and all across the South. And they were saying things like, I'm not old enough to register to vote, but let my teacher register to vote. Let my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. We all can do something. Again, Jeff has just said, we're too quiet. When I spoke at the March on Washington, I said, I was 23 years old, had all of my hair and a few pounds lighter. But I remember saying to that crowd that day, you tell us to wait. You tell us to be patient. We don't want our freedom gradually, but we want it, and we want it now. We need to use everything we have at our disposal to help liberate all of our people.
Let me ask you this, because you might be the best person to answer this question. You talk about the powers that be telling black folks during that time to wait and to be patient. But I see old black folks, and I'm gonna quantify this, old black folks telling young black folks the same thing in 2017. You gotta wait, you gotta be patient. How do we in our community navigate helping young people fight old people and revere elders?
You can have all of the respect, and you can revere your father and your grandfather and your great-grandfather and great-grandmother's group, but you got to push.
But how did you do it?
We just got out there and did it.
You fought some old folks.
We got out there and did it.
Y'all fought some old, there were some elders that helped you all, that were advisors, that were mentors, that were guides. But y'all fought some old folks to get them out of the way of blocking a youth movement. I'm curious, what advice would you give? How did you fight old folks, even as you revered elders? Because I'm clear, even in this room right now, it's some old folks scared of young people in their movement. They want them to talk the way they do, move the way they do. I'm curious, because you did it at a time that in many cases pivoted what the ultimate outcome of the movement was. How did that happen?
Well, I remember in 1961, when we were released from prison during the Freedom Rides in Mississippi, came back to Nashville, Tennessee, and the Race Relation Institute was meeting at Fisk University. Thurgood Marshall was there, my first time meeting Thurgood Marshall. And he said something like, John Lewis, you all don't need to continue the freedom rides. Too many of you have been arrested and going to jail and been beaten. Let's just take one case to the United States Supreme Court. And I said, Mr. Marshall, thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for fighting the battle in the courts. But we need a mass movement. And we need that today. We got to make some people uncomfortable. And it doesn't matter whether it's our parents or grandparents or the older leaders. We got to get out there and really push and pull, pick them up, put them down. And sometimes you saw what some of us did on the House floor about a year ago, to try to do something about gun violence, trying to get the Speaker of the House to bring a bill to the floor. And we organized a sit-in in the well of the House. Never in the history of our country that a group of members took seats in the well of the House. And we got to do some things that may seem to be radical, may seem to be extreme. Sometimes you have to get in the way. When I was growing up and asked my mother, my father, my grandparents about the signs that I saw, saying white waiting, colored waiting, white men, white women, colored. They said, boy, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But Rosa Parks and Dr. King and others inspired me to get in trouble, what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. And it's time for black people, white people, goodwill, Asian American and Native American, Hispanic, all of us to get in trouble and lead this country in a different direction.
Before we take questions from the audience, and we've got about maybe 5 minutes to take questions from them, you talk about getting in trouble and you talk about being disruptive, but there is a real fear. And I'm curious how you fought your fear, because you risked a lot on the front lines of that movement, sacrificed potential jobs, sacrificed education, and just to say go out there and do it, which I agree with you is important, but navigating and managing the fear of repercussion is something else. What do you say to young and seasoned alike that will be risking something by being disruptive? How do they challenge that fear?
Well, we studied. We studied the way of peace. We studied the way of love. We studied the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. And we made up our minds that it was better to live free than to die as a slave. So, I got arrested 40 times during the 60s and been arrested 5 times since I've been in the Congress. And I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. I think you just cannot be at home with yourself. I lost friends. I love Martin Luther King Jr. I wrote him a letter when I was 17 years old. He wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket, invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. He inspired me to get involved. I met Rosa Parks when I was 17, and made me a better human being. We all have to come to that point where we respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. But I tell you, things are going to get a little worse. But daylight is going to come, and it won't be long.
Thank you.
That's why we must still rise.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Lewis. A conversation with Congressman Lewis could easily be a master's level course at an institution, and you wouldn't repeat anything. So the fact that we were able to cover as much as we did in a short time, Congressman, I thank you so much. There's no way we're getting to every question, but what I would love for you to do is 3 things. Number 1, ask a question. Number 2, ask a question. Number 3, ask a question. If you have not asked that question within 15 seconds, I will ask you to ask a question. Longtime leader of the Washington Bureau of the NAACP, Hillary Shelton, please.
Jeff, thank you, and Congressman Lewis, it's an honor to be with you today. Thank you so much for what you've done for us and the fruition of the movement that we've been able to move voting rights as we have. With that being said, I get the impression that after experiencing the 2008 election where more African Americans turned out in the history of the nation, and the only thing that beat that was what happened in 2012, led by our young people, 18 to 24, we saw a continuous growth in which we delivered the first African American president to the White House.
So let's see your question.
So much more happened. The question being, it appears to me that it's being chiseled away. Supreme Court voted to pass in the Shelby versus Holder decision to eliminate one of the most important protections of voting rights.
And your important question.
And the important question is, what do we do now?
We must get out and work and organize and mobilize like we never done it before. I think we're too patient. I think some of us feel like that we're so down, until down don't get me down. We need to just stand up, be brave, be bold, and push. We all can play a role. We all can do something. We all can make a contribution. And we're too silent. We need to get our young people, our children, to read the literature, the books, watch the film, tell them the stories, inspire them to push and pull. In Selma, Alabama, school teachers left the classroom in 1963 and 64 and walked to the courthouse to attempt to register to vote. How can we be at home with ourselves when we have someone serving as Attorney General as Jeff Sessions? How can we be at home with ourselves when we see what is happening to so many of our young people, to our brothers and sisters? We need some fire under us.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is basically this. The sheets are off, the hoods are off, they're putting on suits. Is it possible now for us to start looking at these systemic problems as it relates to extremism, white supremacy, when these people are working in law enforcement, in the correctional institutions? Is it possible for us to now start looking in the backgrounds of the people that are abusing our young individuals now by looking into their jackets, excessive force of those people that are doing this? How do we do that? What do we do?
We need to do what you suggested, that and more. In recent weeks, in the state of Georgia, not too far from the city of Atlanta, a white police officer stopped a car. A young white woman was driving the car, and the police officer said to her in so many words, "Don't be afraid. We only kill black people." What do we do about it? Racism is still deeply embedded in American society. We're not there yet. We're not a post-racial society. We have to call it what it is at all levels, whether it's in the White House or in the courthouse. We have to deal with it. Don't try to sweep it under the rug and say it doesn't exist. We have smart people, scholars, writers. Tell the stories. We all have stories to tell.
Let me do this really quickly because, again, we are short on time. I'd like the next two people in line to quickly tell their questions, very quickly, and then Congressman Lewis will give his closing thoughts.
Good morning, Congressman Lewis and Uncle Jeff. My question is, as a young person learning to bridge the gap, how do we handle conversations when people tell us to quickly get over racism or slavery? When Americans have given Jewish people and Native Americans time to go through their ordeal, but when it comes to the African American person, they want us to forget slavery and forget the systematic racism. How do we handle that as the next generation?
Thank you. And the last question.
Yes, Congressman Lewis, thank you so much for this opportunity. I represent Stand Up for Democracy in D.C. Coalition. We are still fighting for full citizenship in Washington, D.C. How do we are at the point now where we have the highest number of co-sponsors for our legislation that is before the House and the Senate, but it is not there yet. How do we inspire people in D.C. to go more for just the legislative approach and get out in the street and bring the attention to the nation to our lack of full rights and citizenship?
Thank you so much. So, Congressman, in some cases, those can merge, but how do young people in particular begin to have this conversation, or us as a community, when people tell us to get over our pain, to stop talking about our history? And then the second is a very specific one about mobilization for DC citizenship.
Well, if you visit the African American Museum that is located on the mall, and I think today there are more people visiting the museum than are visiting the White House. When you walk through that museum, how can you get over? How can you get over the way our people were treated? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to get over it. You don't need to get over it. You must have the capacity and the ability, in spite of what happened to a people, to be brave, bold, courageous, organize the unorganized, come up with plans to combat the racism that still exists in America. And in DC, you have 49 African American members of Congress, right? Or make up the Black Caucus. And then there's hundreds of others that support us. We must do what we can to take the House back, take the Senate back, and put on the Democratic agenda the whole question of home rule for DC. If it left up to me, if I had the power to issue an executive order, I would make DC a state and give you 2 senators and 2 members of the House. But you have to push. You can't be quiet. I just think too many of us are too quiet.
Let me say this, ladies and gentlemen, I and you know those who have given a great deal of their life to work, and as they become seasoned, they rest as they deservedly can. This soldier has not. And we appreciate, Congressman Lewis, that as seasoned as you continue to be, you keep seasoning us to make us better and challenging us to push and serving in your own way. So one more time, ladies and gentlemen, can we give a round of applause to Congressman John Lewis?
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there some reason why I did not get a response to the letter that I sent May 23rd?
So, Ranking Member Waters, first of all, let me thank you for your service to California. Being a resident of California, I appreciate everything that you've done for the community there.
I don't want to take my time up with
I
how
also
great I
have
am.
appreciated the opportunity to meet with
Reclaiming
you
my time.
several times
Reclaiming my
when
time.
we were doing our
Reclaiming my time.
The time belongs to the gentlelady from California.
Let me just say to you, thank you for your compliments about how great I am, but I don't want to waste my time on me. I want to know about the May 23rd letter. You know about it? Why did you not respond to me and my colleagues?
I was going to answer that.
Just please go straight to the
And
answer.
Mr. Chairman, I thought when you read the rules, you acknowledged that I shouldn't be interrupted and that I would have
Reclaiming
the
my
opportunity.
time. What he failed to tell you was when you're on my time, I can reclaim it. He left that out, so I'm reclaiming my time. Please, will you respond to the question of why I did not get a response, me and my colleagues, to the May 23rd letter?
Well, I was going to tell you my response.
Just tell me.
Okay, so first of all, okay, let me just say that the Department of Treasury has cooperated extensively with the Senate Intel Committee, with the House
Reclaiming my
Intel
time.
Committee, with the
Reclaiming my
Senate
time.
Judiciary
Reclaiming my
Committee.
time.
Okay?
Reclaiming
Matter of
my
fact,
time.
Mr. Secretary,
Reclaiming my
the time belongs to the gentlelady from California.
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, I don't understand the rules because I
Reclaiming
thought I
my
was allowed to
time.
answer questions.
Reclaiming my time. Would you please explain the rules and do not take that away from my time?
Ladies and gentlemen, keep your hands together for the U.S. Representative from California, Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
Okay. Oh, my goodness.
I don't know if anybody wants to interview you now.
Wow.
So Congresswoman Waters, so I don't waste any of your time. People saw that clip, and there were a lot of people who thought that was the first time you went gangster. You have been the same person you were on that video for your entire political career. And so I would just like to start by saying thank you
You're welcome.
for just being who you are
Thank you.
in a time where so many are running afraid.
That's right. Thank you.
So as we talk about that,
Yes.
Jeff Sessions,
Yes.
in my estimation, is even more dangerous than the person in the White House, because he's pragmatically beginning to dismantle work that people in this room and many of those that Congressman Lewis talked about, the work that they've done, and it's immediately impacting lives.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about, number one, some of the most egregious areas that Sessions is attacking, and pragmatically, how do we respond to it?
Well, you're absolutely correct. Let me, first of all, thank you for being who you are. Starting as a very young person, taking the initiative, knowing that you had power and you have worked it tremendously, and I appreciate you. Please give Jeff a big round of applause. Thank you. You're absolutely right about Jeff Sessions. First of all, he's a racist. He's a throwback. He has defined himself throughout his career. And so the President of the United States appointed him to one of the most important offices in all of government, to become the Attorney General, with the power that he holds to do the damage that he set out to do. I have a session all about Jeff Sessions, and we're going to deal with his attack on mandatory minimums. We've been working hard to get justice in this system because of the mandatory minimums that have sent so many of our people to prison. Young people, small amounts of drugs, crack cocaine, who have ended up with long terms in prison. They have to increase the prison population tremendously, but he now wants to review that, and he wants to get tough and do away with the mandatory minimums relaxations that we have done. And then voting rights. You know, he said that the NAACP and the ACLU were communist organizations when they were fighting to make sure they protect the voting rights of our people. Consent decrees, this is very important. You take a look at what's happening in St. Louis right now. You take a look at all of the targeting of young black males for the most part, but black people in general, all of the lives that have been lost. The Justice Department now can move into these local police jurisdictions, take a look at their practices, and work at redoing the training, helping to identify where they have been unfair, on and on and on. When they move in and they identify bad police officers with bad records, etc., and they have to get rid of them, they work out an arrangement with that local police jurisdiction, and then they follow it for years to make sure the changes are made. Just like what happened in Ferguson when they determined that all these warrants were being issued unfairly to African Americans traveling through these little cities and towns. Well, he is saying that we should leave these local jurisdictions alone. Don't interfere with these police departments. Let them do their work. The federal government doesn't have any business being involved. And so he does not want to do consent decrees. As a matter of fact, he wants to undo them altogether. And then there's affirmative action. He is saying that white people are the victims of affirmative action. He has moved aggressively on all of these areas: mandatory minimums, voting rights, consent decrees, affirmative action. And so...
But can you talk a little bit about the affirmative action piece? Because I think people are incredibly clear on the voting rights piece, and many people that don't know dissent decrees still know that the Justice Department helped to push and support local municipalities in bringing about police reform. But many states have not dealt with ballot initiatives the way your state has, that over a period of 20 years dismantled affirmative action.
That's right.
Especially by way of education. And what has the impact of that been? Because I hear him talking about this false sense of equity and equality,
yes.
but not talking about what the impact has been in places that has gone through it.
Well,
and California
you can take a look at higher education, and you can see, for example, with UCLA in California, It has been years since we've had the kind of representation of blacks coming into that institution that would make good sense for a state like California, where, you know, black kids are graduating with 3.5, 3.9, 4 point, but they couldn't get into UCLA. And that has happened all over the country. But let me tell you, one of the reasons we've not been able to really fight for affirmative action, too many black people were ashamed of affirmative action. And they would say to you, well, no, I got in on my own. I didn't benefit from affirmative action. I was smart enough. Well, come on, people. You know, the fact of the matter is that you have all of these legacy appointments of people who have relatives, who have management in these universities, and they get in because their parents gave money, because their parents are part of the alumni, etc. So that's real affirmative action for white people that happens in these universities. And so black people should not be ashamed of affirmative action that's trying to correct the wrongs of the past. And so it has been very harmful in all of our universities.
And so whether we're talking about Jeff Sessions around the issues of police reform, or whether we're talking about the fact that we no longer are going to have an SBA or a business focus from this White House that's trying to help develop black businesses at the local level, there's no shortage of areas that we can target.
Just take a look at his cabinet. Betsy DeVos on education. She hasn't seen the inside of a classroom. She doesn't know anything about education. And she's bringing in all of the private post-secondary schools that rip off our people every day, who are trying to get an education, who may have dropped out, and they go to one of these colleges that's holding a private post-secondary colleges, who are saying, come here, we can train you. You get the money from the government in order to, you know, pay their tuition, etc. And she's bringing them back in. As a matter of fact, she's bringing into her administration one of the managers of one of the big private post-secondary schools that's been a part of all the ripoff. And then look at Ben Carson. My God. My grandmother would call him an educated fool. Here's a man that has a reputation of being, you know, a very highly competent surgeon. But when he talks about poor people, he says they're the cause of their poverty. He doesn't understand why you didn't do what he did and why you didn't make it like he made it. And he doesn't know the difference between slavery and immigration. And so he's coming before my committee. If you think I took Mnuchin on, you watch what I'm going to do to Ben Carson. Let's just take a look. Look at Mnuchin over the Treasury Secretary, Betsy DeVos in education, Ben Carson over at HUD, Wilbur Ross, who's part of the Kremlin clan, and all of these people in the cabinet that he has chosen to run this country. If we're not upset, something's wrong with us.
Well, and let me stop there, because you are clearly using your job, the space that you have, to take them to task.
That's
whether
right.
it's in committee or whether it's challenging in back rooms.
That's right.
But there's a nation of people, and frankly a room of people that are also trying to figure out how do they up their own game. What are recommendations? Because you've already said there's no shortage of issues. But if we're not elevating and evolving, let me be more specific. What do you say to young people who have been a part of showing up at rallies, showing up at marches, using social media, effectively using their cultural currency to lift up issues? What do you say to those that want to go to another level about how do I get involved in sustained engagement around these movements? And whether it's policy or something else, what do they do?
Well, I think there are a number of things. Most of the protests have been after killing, and our young people show up in the street, as they're doing in St. Louis now, and that peters out. I mean, it doesn't last very long. And so I think it's very important to understand how the systems work and get involved in them in different ways. For example, I know some are saying, well, I don't like the Democratic Party, I don't like the Republican Party, you're all the same. We're not the same, but they have not focused on the differences between the parties. But let's take a look at how we do not involve ourselves in Democratic Party politics or in electoral systems. First of all, you will see that many of these right-wing organizations not only are involved in raising money, but they show up also. They come to Washington, D.C., they lobby. They have lobby days, and they come and they back up their legislators. And whether it is Second Amendment rights, on the gun issue, or whether it is, dealing with choice and whether or not women should have control of their bodies, they come. And so we don't have enough people who show up at the Capitol and really organize lobby days where they go from office to office. The second thing is, don't understand enough about how to raise money and how to create PACs. These PACs are very important because they support the kind of legislators that you say you want. Most of us are out there doing what we do, and we go to various organizations, we speak at chapters of the NAACP and women's groups, etc. But when it gets down to how we get elected, the support is not really there.
But let me agree and push back a little bit, and then we're going to open the floor. Most of the people you mentioned have huge money and institutional infrastructure behind them. So when you talk about Second Amendment, NRA is putting millions of dollars behind that. When you talk about research, you've got the Cato Institute. When you talk about the Heritage Foundation and what they're doing, when you talk about having Fox News as a media infrastructure that pushes out their piece, we're infrastructure deficient. And so how do we play a better job at the money game? Because if we've got $1 trillion in spending power, but we're still talking about the organizations we don't have, there's a disconnect between the money we have and how we invest it. What are some of the ways we need to play a more sophisticated role in the money game in politics?
Well, I alluded to creating PACs. Anybody can create a PAC. Any organization can do that and collect small amounts of money. It will add up. We're not on the internet collecting and asking for the contributions in the way that we should. You have a lot of independent organizations. The Koch brothers run their own thing. I mean, they are not involved necessarily with the Republican Party. They support a lot of what they do, but they're rich, they have a lot of money, they raise money, and they use those PACs to influence and to contribute to those efforts that are important to them. And it's very important for us to start to do that. We talk about not having money, but we have plenty of money. As a matter of fact, one of the workshops that I'm going to do Friday morning is about the amount of money that hip hop has put into this national economy. $1 trillion. When you take a look at Jay-Z and you take a look at P. Diddy and all of the branding that they have done and the money that they have raised, and you take a look at hip hop and what we've contributed to style and to fashion, not just rap, all of that, millions, multi-millions of dollars. When are we going to decide that our politics are just as important as some of the other things that we do?
Thank you. I want to make sure we can get as many questions as we can, so please, brief questions for the Congresswoman, and we'll get to as many as we can. Yes, ma'am.
Congressman Maxine Waters, we're so happy to see you.
Hey!
My question is, in terms of young folk who are giving tremendous amount of money to divide the black community, how can we follow the money? Because we have a mayoral race in Durham, North Carolina with 5 black folk running for mayor and 1 white man.
Yep.
And the money that the other PACs is giving, they're paying black folk $5,000 in an election. How do we follow the money and get those 5 to come together and we decide which one is the best one out there? Coming together. That's our biggest problem with young folk now. And I'm old, I'm one of the old ones.
No, you're an elder, and there's a difference.
But I tell you one thing, if we could come together, instead of, they are paying those other young folk to divide us.
Thank you. So, and we've seen it in
Yes.
St. Louis. We've
Yes.
seen it in Ferguson. We're getting ready to see it in Atlanta. And to her point, it's not, because I want to make sure we say this, it's not just about young people. There is a level of misogyny that I'm seeing where you've got men who can't win a race
Yes.
blocking sisters who could win if they move.
Yes.
And so how do we talk about not just coming together, but how do we talk about smart politics that says who is the best candidate for now, and how can Negroes that can't win be reminded they can't win to support the sister who can?
Okay. Excuse me one moment. Let me just say this. The reason we have this kind of division and competition that's not in our best interest is because our communities are not organized. And I tell you exactly what can be done. If those who claim to have influence, and this includes the ministers and the so-called community leaders, if they organize a community conference, you take all of the candidates ahead of time and you interview them and you learn about them, their backgrounds, what they care about, what they've done, what their positions are. And then you let them present themselves on a stage and you have the community come out and listen to what they're saying, and then you let that conference, you let that community say, we are going to decide to support this one person because this is the person who's aligned with our concerns, and this is the person who understands what the job is, and we're going to put the community behind this one person. But you got to organize. You've got to bring the community out to choose the person. Otherwise, everybody will choose themselves, and that's why you will have the division. Organize the communities. Ministers, you have the opportunity to talk to more people on Sunday morning in America than anybody else. And I want you to know, we're not hearing from you.
No.
We're not hearing from you. Where are you? You have a president who said in his campaign that you don't have anything. You get shot anytime you walk down the street. You don't have anything to lose. Talk down to you. Where is your level of insult? When are you going to come together and have to organize all of these people that are coming to church every Sunday and do the kind of community work that will select the right individuals to run for office?
Let me do this really quickly. There's no way I'm going to get to everybody in line. If we can get the next 3 questions, there will be questions in the larger panel, so there will be another opportunity. But if I can quickly get these last 3 questions. Yes, sir.
I'm Reverend Daniel Graves. I'm a community activist from Houston, Texas.
Okay.
And I kudos to you, Maxine, because I am a young minister in my neighborhood for over 15 years. I'm fighting a case with the Supreme Court right now.
Quick question.
Okay.
What I'm looking for is this. What kind of guidelines can we put in place for Supreme Court to not be able to put our to put our civil rights cases in the back of the order list? What is happening?
Okay, let me. I got the question, brother. Let me get these 2 other questions, and we'll make sure she answers it. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Mildred Hodgson, and I'm the president of Central Long Island NAACP. And what I want to know is I've been trying to encourage young people to vote for run for office for next year. What do I do to get them to run for these offices, starting with the local legislation? We do have one person that's running, but I'd like them to run for Congress since they're going to be 435 seats next year, and we're trying to encourage them.
Yes, ma'am.
And so many of them do not want to, want to run. They're not interested, and I keep telling them because we have people.
I got your
that can
question,
run.
ma'am. I appreciate it. It's a great question. We're going to get to it. Last question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Councilwoman Chawna Banks from Baton Rouge. What I'd like to know is how do you deal with not the Trumps and the Sessions, but the African American elected officials that are our color but not our kind, who run on issues that are for disenfranchised communities, but once they're elected, they totally abandon those issues, and I'm a very opinionated and I stick to those issues, but then you become disenfranchised with your colleagues. They abstain from votes. They don't get involved. They don't support you. They actually may even come against you. How do you deal with not those issues, those hood rats in our communities that don't support us?
Thank you so much for all the color commentary. 3 questions. One, how do we engage the Supreme Court in general? Because so many of us don't even engage the Supreme Court, but dealing with the order in which cases are heard. Second, are we going to develop candidate incubators at some point where we're preparing young people to run for office instead of just asking them? And then 3, how do we really hold elected officials accountable during the process, not just during the election?
Well, you know, you're going to hear over and over again about voting. And some people think, well, I vote. And everyone should understand the price that has been paid by our ancestors for voting. But we are not voting our strength. When you talk about appointments by presidents, such as appointments to the Supreme Court, the community has to show up. First of all, we should be putting forth somebody that we would like to see appointed to the Supreme Court. And we should get behind them. And we should challenge presidents, whether they are, you know, Republicans or Democrats, to talk about the kind of people that we want. We get on the radio, we get on television, we march, we organize. You don't leave it to those to do the right thing. These people are not going to do the right thing. They're going to do what is in their best interest. And it's all about voting, organizing, showing up, and working in order to have influence on elected officials and these systems that dictate everything that goes on in our country. That's number one. I believe that wanting to be an elected official is in the gut. And I believe that those who have the passion, those who believe that they can make change, those who believe that they can impact the system in some way are your best candidates. I think if you have to beg, pull, and do everything to try and get somebody to run, that may not be the right person. But I do think that those of us who are in office have to demonstrate we stand for something. This will inspire young people a lot more than thinking it's all just a bunch of people looking to do good for themselves or move up the ladder or to have opportunities for themselves. We've got to make sure that we're speaking truth to power, that we're standing up for young people, that they know that we've got their backs. When we do that, I think more will be interested. But as long as you're trying to encourage them, beg them, what have you, it doesn't really work. When you identify young people in the community who are speaking up, when you identify some of these young people in Black Lives Matter who are saying what needs to be said, then go get them and say, I see what you're saying. I see what you're doing. I think you're going to make a good elected official. Let's work with people who have the passion and who want to do it and who understand how important it is. There are plenty of them in our communities, but guess what? We don't associate with them because we think they're too controversial. Black people, you better get controversial. You'd better be controversial. You had better call it like it is. We've been shut down because others have defined us. When they said to us about 10, 15 years ago, oh, she's playing the race card, you should say, yeah, and I got a lot more I'm going to play. Don't run away from it. And that's what happened. We stopped calling a racist because they said that that's all you do. You don't do anything else. Don't let these people intimidate or scare you. You got to get in the fight. And you got to be in the fight to make some sacrifices, to understand when you're winning, to continue to work, to make things happen. And I want to tell you, it is time to take off the handcuffs. It's time to get in it. It's time to call it like it is. Don't come here and tell me, Maxine, you keep on doing what you do. Maxine gonna keep on doing what you do, but when you gonna give me some support? How many of you in your organizations have said impeach 45? Oh no, don't understand. Well, they don't have what it takes. They don't have the laws yet. Impeachment is about whatever the Congress says it is. There is no law that dictates impeachment. What the Constitution says is high crimes and misdemeanors, and we define that. Bill Clinton got impeached because he lied. Here you have a president who I can tell you and guarantee you is in collusion with the Russians to undermine our democracy. Here you have a president who has obstructed justice. And here you have a president that lies every day. Thank God that the special counsel is beginning to connect the dots and understand Facebook's role in it, social media's role in it. When is the black community going to say, yeah, impeach him? It's time to go after him. I don't hear you. Don't another person come up to me and say, you go, girl. No, you go. That's right.
And on that note, Congresswoman Waters, one of the things before you go that I vividly remember about our interaction more than anything else, I was National Youth Director for the NAACP.
Yes.
We were in LA for an event, and you were walking through the crowd, and there was a killer. And when you're from our community, you know who killers are and who they're not.
That's right.
And he was a killer. 6'8", tatted up, walking by you, said, hey, Congresswoman. And you turn around, and he said, where's my hug? And you went up to him, and you embraced him. And I mention that because leadership is not about how you act when you walk with kings. It's how you act when you're with the people and nobody else is around and there's no cameras. And that spoke to me. So that was 20 years ago.
Yes.
And I've never, ever forgotten it because you didn't blink an eye. He knew you.
Yes.
And you knew him.
Yes.
And it wasn't about what his title was or how many felonies he might have or was he strapped at the time. It was that he was a son of the community that you represented.
That's right.
And you embraced him like you would a president of the United, well, not this president, but a president of the United States.
That's right.
And I tell that story to say thank you for fighting for all of us.
You're so welcome.
All the time.
You're so welcome, and I want all of us to know these are our children. They belong to all of us. And one of the things I recognized during the height of crack cocaine in Los Angeles and across this country, that we had children who were literally living in crack houses. Parents had gone astray, gotten involved with drugs, being sent to prison. People who was standing up for the children. They were dropped off of America's agenda. And so when you act like others and you get afraid because a young black man walks past you just because his pants is lower than you'd like, his cap is turned in a way that you don't like, and you want to deny them because they have decided to have symbols of defiance, to say, I know you don't like me. Take a look at me now. I don't like you either. Let's do something about that. Let's embrace them. Let's accept them. Let's talk with them. Let's invite them in. Let's understand the history of black people, where neighbors and communities have served as that village for all of our black kids. Let's get back to that, and let's do that. That's what that's all about. When you fear your own, you will never be able to talk with them. You'll never be able to connect with them.
So many people in this room and have been calling you Auntie Maxine.
Yeah.
And it is a term of endearment. But you're Queen Warrior Maxine.
Wow.
And we honor you. Ladies and gentlemen, Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so very much. Thank you.
Let's do a selfie real quick. Because I got to.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed being with you, and I've got to go. I've got to reclaim my time. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we one more time, Congressman John Lewis and Congresswoman Maxine Waters. So, having heard this perspective and context laid out by our seasoned leaders, we're going to bring out a full panel to discuss the systemic erosion of hard-won civil rights progress and how we begin to create power. But before we do that, I don't know if it is unprofessional or a point of personal privilege, but I'm going to do it anyway because, one, I got to stall for time, and two, because I want to. I would not be able to do what I do in my life without my wife, and she didn't even tell me she was coming. And I didn't see her, I heard Lil Man. And so my wife is here. I want to say, hey, baby, thank you for surprising me. And I'm just going to introduce the entire CBC to Prince Baldwin, John Raymond Johnson. Hey, baby. What's going on? You say hey to everybody? Baldwin is 5 months old and is my man. So we might actually co-moderate this together, depending on his level of interest in the conversation. But let me say this, and very seriously, this next conversation is going to be with a group of individuals, yes, who are not only elected officials, but who are activists, who are running organizations that are addressing the issues that we care about. And the goal here is for us to talk about pragmatic solutions. Yes. Say it again. No. You're making me look bad, brother. About the pragmatic solutions, because I know if you're like me, I get tired of coming to CBC and leaving with robust conversations and better parties than I do solutions. And if you leave having had a better time at night than you did direction during the day, what's the point? And so thank you to those that put this panel together and those that are leading incredibly pragmatic panels all throughout the day. Are we ready to introduce our panel? We are? Fantastic. If we can, and they have robust and fantastically deep and wonderful bios. And I recommend that you go to Google and read them in their entirety. But please know that they are doing incredible work. First, we have the President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Ms. Vanita Gupta. The National President of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, Cleola Brown. Co-President of the Women's March, Board Founder of Mallory Consulting and former Executive Director of the National Action Network, Tamika Mallory. Don't put that in your mouth, baby. And we're bringing back two of our congressional leaders, both of whom greeted us at the top of the program. He is a co-chair of this year's annual legislative conference, also the co-chair of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus. Please welcome from Texas 33rd Congressional District, Congressman Mark Vesey. And she is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and represents Texas' 18th Congressional District. Please welcome back Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. And finally, we invite Clarence E. Cox II, the national president of NOBLE, also known as the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, to join us on this panel. Please give a round of applause to our panel. Bye, baby. And listen, we're family here. And I think at some point we need to be aggressive in defending our families, defending our children, and representing who we are. In this conversation, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, I'd love if you would begin in talking just for a second about what you think is the most important legislative priority that we have. We're here as a part of the Congressional Black Caucus legislative to hear the agenda, to figure out how we can support it, to know what we can do on the local level to push our elected officials, whether members of the CBC or not. What is the single most important current legislative issue that if we walk out of here, everyone needs to have on their hearts, their minds, their lips, and their feet?
Jeff, thank you so very much. Good afternoon, or good morning again. I guess we are still in the morning. My day has been going on. Let me do one thing, and that is to acknowledge Dr. Allison. Are you still in the room? Dr. Allison has been to all 47 ALCs. Wow. All 47. Would you give her a hand, please? There she is, all 47. Jeff, let me quickly say this. I believe, amen. Yes, sir. I believe in a movement. My colleagues will have many different themes that they are engaged in. But I think the criminal justice reform under this umbrella of systematic dismantling of civil rights is one of the major elements. The fact that we as a Western civilization in the United States incarcerate more people than ever. Now, I am not diminishing economic development. I am not diminishing the environment and health care, a dastardly health care bill that's on the floor, nor am I diminishing civil rights and voting rights. My colleagues will speak about it. But if we do not get a handle on stopping the tide, the wave, the tsunami of the incarceration of young men and now women, building the numbers not of the federal system, but of the state system for every infraction, starting with the incarceration of juveniles. If we do not at one point begin to dismantle mandatory minimums, I believe in law and order, but if you have a sentence of 25 years for an ounce of marijuana, and your life is just gone because your jurisdiction believes that that is important to incarcerate, where is the redemption? As I indicated to you, I was at a mission this morning, and we were feeding and fellowshipping with African-American men mostly, whose lives have been steered off the appropriate pathway because of many elements, but some in the criminal justice system. So I'd like to see us deal with mandatory minimums, prison reform, juvenile justice reform, stop incarcerating our children, and I'd like us to jump forward over the idea of incarceration and deal with the idea of redemption, job creation, putting them in businesses, and turning the corner on what justice is all about. So I would hope that we could reignite the advocacy for criminal justice reform.
Well, and Tamika, let me bring you in on this because this dovetails directly into a lot of the work that you've done over your career as an activist. Yeah, because I think the Congresswoman makes a great point. But the interesting piece is we've never disconnected from that work. The challenge has been we haven't connected local to local to local to local to create, in some cases, the kind of national momentum that's necessary. One, can you talk about some of the best practices that you've seen in groups in different parts of the country dealing with different parts of the issues that the Congresswoman brought up? And number two, what are recommendations that you give that even in some of the mobilizations that are planned over the course of the next year to challenge this Department of Justice, but also challenge some of the local and state policies that affect what the Congresswoman was mentioning?
Thank you very much, and to all those who put this together and had me to participate today, I'm very grateful. And of course, Jeff is my brother. I appreciate that you're always pushing us to what are the solutions. And I think I can pretty much bring both of those questions into one, because the local game is where we're finding that the most impact is being made, right? And I'll give you examples of New York. We fought the Raise the Age campaign recently, where New York and North Carolina were the only two states to continue to prosecute 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. So the age for criminal responsibility was 16 and 17, and we know that the Khalif Browder story has been a story that many of us have seen and have really been impacted by what happened to this young man who supposedly stole a book bag, spent 2 years in Rikers, over a year in solitary confinement, and ended up, at the end of it all, he couldn't deal with trying to re-enter society, and he committed suicide. And then his mother died not long after. And what we did there in terms of raising the age, and while it is not perfect in terms of the legislation that is in place at this point, but what we found was that making sure that the advocates and the elected officials, the clergy network, and all of the different grassroots operations were working together was very important. What I'm finding, and what I think is very problematic for this movement, is that at times we feel like we don't need one another. We don't have to work together. We don't have to come to the table together, that there can be a ground game where people are organizing on the street, but that they don't have to find a way to connect the dots with what is happening in the state legislature or in your city council office. That is impossible, because if we are not using our ground game to move what's happening on a policy level, then it does not properly manifest itself into like real action and real reform that we can count on to lift these sort of shackles off of our people. So with the Raise the Age campaign, I know a Assembly member from New York, Michael Blake, has been around this conference. We worked with him. We worked with the state senators. We worked with our city council members, and we had a major grassroots effort, and then we brought law enforcement to the table, because all law enforcement is not bad. There are some people within law enforcement that want to give you the tools necessary to go in and have those conversations. And with all of those components, we were able to put the governor in a position where he had to get something done. If he was able to find some peace with the elected officials and just hear a bunch of people screaming outside, it wouldn't have worked. We had to bring everyone to the table at the same time. And I think another part that is really important for many of the activists who are saying that the problem is we're working with some of the elected officials who have been gatekeepers, is that we had to expose them as well. Here's the legislation that we want. If you do not support this, we are going to go in your communities to the housing developments and other places where you intend to go back and get votes and tell them that you did not support the work. And at the end of the day, it's hard work, but it is the work that has to be done in order to move the needle forward. We cannot just hold protests without ensuring that we are also pushing policy at the same time.
So thank you so much, Tamika, and for being comprehensive in that answer. Clarence, I want to come to you in a second about this, specifically around the law enforcement piece, although I know you can speak broadly. But Vanita, I want to talk to you for a second, because Tamika brings up an interesting point about these intersection points and collaborative work. But if organizations and institutions and grassroots activists haven't been trained, don't know who these folks are, don't know how one person's work connects to the other, whose ultimate responsibility is it to begin to create the kind of synergy that Tamika's talking about? And are we seeing that happen anywhere in an effective way, not just grass top to grass top or grassroots to grassroots?
So thank you. First of all, I'm really honored to be here too, and just to be on this amazing panel of folks that I've worked with here and there. It's really great to be here. The thing that I am most excited about in a time that is very dark and challenging on civil rights, let's just say that to say the least, is that there is a lot of solidarity that is being built in local communities around the country. The Leadership Conference is a coalition of 200 plus national organizations that cover the span of racial justice to LGBT rights to women's rights to you name it. And it's a coalition that has existed, as you all know, for about 67 years. But what we are seeing right now is the kind of coalition and solidarity building that has been endemic to our coalition. That's what's happening all over the country. And when Tamika's talking, that took a coalition that people standing across communities and standing up and saying, we are gonna push for juvenile justice reform, we're gonna protect our kids, and we aren't gonna separate our communities, and we're gonna demand accountability together of our elected officials to get this done. What we're seeing right now, we are in an all-out assault on voting rights, okay? We're talking about criminal justice reform. That is absolutely key. And I'm gonna take it two parts. We've got an attorney general right now who is taking us back to the 1980s on criminal justice reform here in Washington, D.C. But the amazing thing is the momentum on the local level and at the state level that is resisting, actively resisting that across party lines, across groups like LGBT rights groups, racial justice groups, saying we are pushing for criminal justice reform because it is where we need to go. This system has been inhumane and it has devastated communities of color. And voting rights right now, we have at the leadership conference, you've got groups that never thought of themselves as dealing with voting rights issues, groups that were criminal justice issues, groups that were pushing for gay marriage rights, groups that were pushing on to ensure that women could protect their own bodies. They are all saying, this Pence-Kobach commission, this commission that the president has put up to basically try to undermine the voting rights of black and brown communities all over the country, we are not going to stand for it. We are going to stand together because an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. And that's where this movement is right now, and that's what we need to build in community after community to see the wins that we're going to, and I am hopeful we are going to win this because we are standing in solidarity right now, but we've got to make those connections at the local level.
Congressman Vesey, I know I want to bring you in on this, but I know that Congresswoman Lee has to jump shortly. And so, Congresswoman Lee, I want to ask you, how do we ensure sustainability? Because you know as well as I do that the enemy on the other side has long money, and social justice is not a short game. And so in some cases, I feel like we end up being like the pissed off kids on campus that the administration just waits out until people burn out or graduate, because we don't have the institutional infrastructure and money for sustainability. How do we begin to shift this so the kind of things that Vanita's talking about become funded, morph into new institutional infrastructure, and ensure the sustainability that you and your colleagues need the ground to be able to do, so you can push the legislative focus based on the public will?
Thank you for that sustainability question. I'm going to look folk in the eye. First of all, I want to just say that there are some sustainers here in the audience. Congressman Lawson, Congressman Brown was here, Congressman Evans. Are you all still here, members of Congress? Wave if you're still in the room. So thank you very much. Val Demings, thank you very much for being here. They're part of the sustaining group. But
Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, I think I see.
Is Congresswoman Beatty here?
She was.
Was here, all right. All the members of the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Board. Can I just thank you all very much for being here? There you are, thank you. Sustainability is crucial. It is the lifeblood. So I love what you're going to hear from the rest of the members, because they're going to, on this panel. And Tamika, thank you. That was Caliph, whose brother and mother I met. And we now have a bill in Washington that I want your movement to come, because I want that bill passed. You know, they make noises about, well, we don't want to pass this bill on the federal level because the state people are doing it. I want to make it very clear. Whose government is this? Whose federal government is this?
Our government.
And if we do not speak truth to power to be able to press it down to others, then who else will speak? So the sustainability question is a legislative piece, it is a movement piece, and it's a money piece. Auntie Max was right about the money that is in our community. Do we invest it in sustaining the movement? Which is what, if I might, I know you might have to go to the history book, Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier did for Martin Luther King.
That's right.
We do need money to sustain the movement. I don't know how Tamika managed to get $250,000, $500,000, $500,000, more than $1 million. We didn't have to worry about counting. Women of all stripes here on January 21st. I was here. But why aren't we back again? So that we can talk about voting rights that are being taken away from you, or the Voter Fraud Commission that does not exist. The Congressional Black Caucus Foundation can be your strong policy arm. We know how to write these issues up, galvanize these thought processes. So you've got that. You've got thinkers out throughout the country. We should be here on criminal justice reform. I agree that voting rights is the umbrella that provides us with the lifeblood of making sure that we're engaged from the school board level, where they're trying to underpay teachers, to the highest level, where they're trying to take your health care away. I could say that health care was the most important. You get that. But if we do not stop incarcerating people and make that their life's work, then we will have an economy that is half-baked. So the sustainability is legislative. The sustainability is viewing this legislative process as your process, We need more people showing up in Washington in offices beyond the Congressional Black Caucus. And we need you talking about, we give you 4 points, from voting rights to criminal justice to economic empowerment and education. Would that work?
Yeah.
Does that kind of answer where we are? So I would argue, that the tools are members of Congress in this powerful body of all kinds. I'm not bragging about who we are and how important we are, but this is the most powerful lawmaking body in the world. And so I would make the argument, money, legitimate money, not in your pockets, but money that helps churn the issue. The legislative process and the advocacy of all, which includes police officers, which the chief is going to speak of goodwill. I beg of you, law enforcement, come join us on both criminal justice reform and the ability to put forward law enforcement Honesty and Integrity Reform Act, which gives you money to beat out the consent decrees. And when I say beat them out, take the money and reform yourself so that we can be protector and servers of the community as we seek to dignify and to help dignify ourselves. I hope we have crafted what I think can be that answer of how we can get going.
Thank you so much for that. And so, Congressman, as a congresswoman talks about sustainability and especially the money, the legislative, and the activism piece, when you think about voting rights, for so often, I think we've been, as a community, wed to the power of the Voting Rights Act, when the Voting Rights Act was never comprehensively all that we needed. It was supposed to be a bridge to somewhere else. I still see people caught up in reinstituting or reconstituting a federal Voting Rights Act versus broad, multi-level voter protection policy that exists at multiple levels. How do you see that, and where do you think the opportunities are for folks in this room to engage at a specific thing at the national level, targeted areas at the state level, and even protection kind of issues at the local level in ways that we haven't really brought together in a comprehensive strategy?
Right, no, absolutely. And let me just tell you that the biggest threat to our voting rights right now are occurring in our state legislatures. And with me being a Texan, I think that it's only fair that I started in my backyard in the state of Texas, where we used to be the state, particularly for what would be considered a southern state. We had some of the most liberal and some of the most easiest ways how to vote out of any state in the entire union, to be quite honest with you. But over the last 10 years, the state of Texas has started to systematically start to dismantle voting rights in our states, beginning with voter ID law. Now, I was still in the state legislature when Texas passed its current voter ID law that we're under right now. And I became the lead plaintiff in that lawsuit to get the voter ID law overturned. Basically, it said that you could only have 5 forms of ID. You couldn't use any state-issued student IDs that are given to you by Prairie View A&M University or Texas A&M University. But you could use your concealed handgun license to vote. And so that was like one of the first steps that they took.
Right.
And there were, and even the state's own data from the Secretary of State's office showed that the people that would be most likely to not have one of the 5 forms of ID and would have difficulty obtaining those were overwhelmingly Black and Latino citizens.
And so what become the way to fight that?
The way how you fight that is we have to get people first of all, activated in midterm elections. Because people always forget, people got very excited to go out and vote for President Obama in 2008 and in 2012. But in 2010, the drop-off is so steep. And what ends up happening is that you have these people that are elected to the governor's mansion that aren't on the same ticket during presidential years. And they're the ones that are setting the policy for voter ID. They're the ones that are setting the policy for redistricting. They're the ones that are setting the policy for all of the things that we're here talking about in 2017 at ALC that affect each and every one of us, but particularly when it comes to voting. And so we have to figure out some sort of way to get people engaged and start sharing the news about all these things that are happening. And I could just go on and on about not just that, but states looking to require you to have a passport, a birth certificate to register to vote. Poll watchers being able to come to election sites without saying who they are, having any sort of ID, just so they can
intimidate people. Who's the organization in your mind that at this present point is doing the most to, and I know there's multiple, so if there's multiple, that's fine, but even if you can quickly list off, who are some of the organizations that we need to be supporting, both with bodies and dollars, who are turning the needle on some of those areas, and whether it's from the money to file lawsuits, which in many cases is that real stopgap, or whether it's the mobilization, who are the folks that we need to be looking to?
I would say the NAACP has done a tremendous job in making sure that voting rights, particularly in the courts and in the legal system, that they are very engaged and very active, working with state legislators, working with members of Congress on all of these issues. And so I would say the NAACP would be my first choice for individuals nationally to get engaged on this process. They really are leading the way and leading the charge on this.
And there are a number of organizations of young people as well. And so it's Youth 100 and some other organizations that I think are clearly engaged. Also, very quickly, I want to get Cleola, you and Clarence in on this before we go to questions from the audience. Whether it is, Cleola, through labor or whether it's through other legacy organizations, you've been doing this work for a long time. And I mean that in a sense of honor. But I think we're recognizing that the work is requiring evolved methods of engagement. How do we most effectively utilize legacy organizations to not do new work, but do evolved work so that those organizations are relevant for new kinds of funding and excite young people who are looking to be engaged in a way that 50 years ago we just weren't even thinking about mobilization?
Well, thanks a lot, Jeff, for that question in particular. Let me first thank my union, SEIU, who sponsors this piece. Yeah, purple. And thank those who are on this panel for the work that each of you do. Recognizing the question around legacy organizations, speaking first to responsibility, is one that in this forum I want to address, if you don't mind. Earlier, the discussion talked about how do we help Congressional Black Caucus members and feel that we're doing what we can in order to support the work that they're doing, because we hit the ground in our legacy organizations and the traditional organizations in our community. But if we don't give resources to the members of the Congressional Black Caucus in a real way to sustain what they are doing, we're gonna miss the whole ball. Congressional Black Caucus members vote the way we need them to do. They show up when we need them to show up. They speak to the issue without fear. And yet, when the monies are being distributed across this country by organizations that have resource dollars, we pinch and share in little dribs and drabs as if to say it's gonna get done anyhow. We can't take each other for granted, and we certainly cannot take this body for granted. So for all of you who have dollars, this is an unsolicited commercial. If you're giving money to somebody, start with the Congressional Black Caucus members who are out there every day trying to keep this fight going and sustaining those things that we do at home, in our communities, in our churches, and everywhere else so that they can continue to have a voice that's going to work. Now, for the other part, the youth piece, okay? A lot of our seniors and seasoned people are afraid to watch young people grow. If we're going to be totally transparent about what leadership is, I know you've been doing it for a while. I'm going to be 70 and I ain't ashamed to say it, all right? But you got to be prepared to get out the way so some of these young folks who have the energy can do what you've been teaching them. Because if you're going to sit in a seat and rot in that seat, nothing happens except you get to tell old stories, and new stuff ain't going to happen, all right? But inside of SEIU, there's been a conscious effort to develop young people's minds and actions. The fight for 15 is not garnered by folks who are walking on a cane, although some of our seniors are blasting it out. but is really pushed by young folk who know how to pull out a tablet and put in the data and information to track those folks that we need to help with the fight to get the job done. Inside of some of the legacy organizations like the one that I have the privilege to work with and for, the A. Philip Randolph Institute, we are growing our youth element because that's who started this stuff along with some of the elders. We're not teaching the old way to register. We are teaching folks to understand the stop gaps that are being placed in the path of folks who need to register and to vote.
And the unions have been, I think, progressive more than in some of the other legacy organizations. One, I think because of the amount of money that they've received during election cycles versus some others, but two, because their membership as a result of who's there has organically evolved versus some other organizations that have to recruit in a different way. So I thank you for mentioning that. I want to make sure that we don't take this police piece off the table. But Brother Clarence, I think Cleola made an interesting point, which spoke to people internally have to fight certain fights. And so there are people internally fighting for young people when there are others internally hating on young people. My question for you is, because we always talk about there are good cops too, which I just think is an interesting statement in itself. What I'm interested in, what defines a good cop when they're quiet? And so how do we create a level of support and pressure for those quote unquote good cops to challenge the blue wall of silence, to attack police unions, which in my opinion are the greatest barrier to police reform, and to speak up as a noble voice of the profession when the voice we keep seeing is one of brutality and abuse?
Well, Jeff, that's a good question, and thank you for having us. But I think what you've seen recently, and I know Noble's ranks and the black community, is we're saddened by these events just as much as our citizenry. And I think what the public has not realized that we are a part of the communities that we police in many cases. We're at the barbershops, the churches, and all of the things that everybody else does. And for us, we've been oppressed inside the departments just as much as we have been outside of the departments, just like regular citizens. And I had a conversation this morning with some of our folks. When Noble was founded in 1976, there was a rush among the leaders of cities around the country to put black males in police leadership positions so that they could later say, we tried it, it did not work.
But talk about how we support, because I know the history of Noble. Right. I agree that you all show up in cases when other people don't, but I don't think the general public understands how do we support officers that want to come out, that want to be courageous, that want to go against some of this culture. How practically do we at the local level support those officers? And then again, what should we expect?
Well, the first thing you can remember is that we're human just like the citizens. And I think oftentimes that's always something that nobody remembers, that it hurts us to see our black folks killed just like it hurts anyone else. But our people sometimes put us in a position where we've got to choose. And I was interested in what Congressman Lewis said, and I agree with him. We need to be disruptive, but there's a difference between disruptive and destructive. When you become destructive, then we've got to go back to the oath that we have sworn to uphold the laws, and that's across the board. So rather than to destroy a community and then go beg to the same people who have oppressed us for money to rebuild these communities, let's talk to the folks who are inside who could probably give you a better insight on how better to accomplish what you're trying to do. When I was down in Sanford doing the Trayvon Martin, folks were going to burn that town down. Ben Crump and some others got together and said, listen, man, let's have a conversation. And we talked about it, and I stood before that body and I said, before you burn this town down, let's let some professionals give you advice on how to better accomplish the mission, which is to challenge the system.
But I was in Sanford.
Right.
And since Sanford, we've seen very little change.
Right.
And so I appreciate that. But at some point, we as a community have to understand who are our internal allies that assist us in this process. And to your point, that may not mean that you have officers on the front line of a rally as much as you have officers that are willing to provide intel off books for what's happening and how we need to maneuver. But and some of those conversations have to be family conversations. But I still don't know if I'm hearing you specifically say, beyond acknowledging officers' humanity, what kind of support does the community that they are paid to serve have to give for them to voice what's wrong in a department, even to Congressman Lewis's point, at the detriment of them putting some things on the line?
Well, again, all politics begin at the local level, and we've got to make sure that the right folks are in there, making sure that we are able to do the right things. We have now seen through technology and others, racial profiling is back, whether you realize it or not. It's back. It's back live and well with the tag readers on the back.
What was the time it left?
Well, under the Justice Department in the last administration, it was governed a lot better. And when this week, when you talk about collaborative reform being removed, then we have those tools that were once there in the Obama administration, it's gone again. And so what I'm saying to you, it got better because racial profiling, you did not receive asset forfeiture dollars, you didn't receive federal funding if your agency was involved in those things. Now that has been removed under this current administration. So what I'm saying to you is, if you elect the right folks in the local levels, that evolves and becomes a federal.
Agree. So because ultimately mayors are selecting police chiefs, police chiefs are helping to set culture, removing old brass that doesn't agree with the new way of doing things. I totally get that. That is more in the direction of what we can begin to do to shift this. I know, Tamika, but I want to provide Congresswoman Jackson Lee some closing remarks, because I know that you have to go, and Tamika, and then we'll open the floor to the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Just to thank you, my brother. Thank you so very much for your passion and steering us very appropriately. But let me try to cut a deal here. This is a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. May I invite Tamika, all of you, to Washington, in a room, that's a closed door. Can you lift what you did in New York on this criminal justice reform? Ms. Gupta, let us lift it. We have our agenda, but let us get in a room. Bring the folk down from New York. Bring all the folk in the room. The sustainability question is what I want to close on. You are only as good as your next success story. We have gone back. We do have someone who leads the Justice Department along the pathway of injustice. Are we going to allow that? I can't hear you. Are we going to allow that?
No.
Are we going to stand by or stand up? I can't hear you. Are we going to stand by or stand up? Stand by or stand up?
Stand up.
If that is your challenge, it will be my challenge. Thank you so very much for being here. These are fantastic persons. Will I see you?
Absolutely.
We're in Washington, but I will see you, and we will move on all of those elements of juvenile justice reform and the other elements dealing with our voter empowerment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Tamika?
So I just, and absolutely, Congresswoman, I mean, we've been working together for so long that it just feels like so many people, and I guess this leads right into my point, so many people think this stuff is new, and I was so happy to hear you say to Auntie Maxine, she's been this all along. And I think it's really dangerous when we sort of have this narrative that things were better, because it was not. Eric Garner died while President Obama was in office.
That's right.
Sandra Bland died while President Obama was in office. And I could go on with the list. And by the way, there was no justice for any of those people. And so when we start talking about things being better at that time versus now, it is very dangerous, because that is to say that when we get a person in office, that somehow things will change. And that is not accurate. The system has to be completely torn down. It cannot continue to exist the way that it does. In New York, you asked a question I just want to get very specific
really quickly,
about,
because I want to
the
get to
NYPD 12. These are 12 people in New York City who came together to say that they were going to file a lawsuit against the city of New York and the police department in New York for upholding the quota system. And the Justice League, the organization that I work with, Carmen Perez and others, have been supporting them. There is a woman, one woman of 12, who works for the police department, that all of her overtime and any other ramification for speaking out that you could even think of has been thrown at this woman to get her to be the one to fold. So when you say, what can the community do? It is really important that when officers come out, and I heard John Lewis talking about we have to do more. The people sitting in this room are responsible for officers being able to speak out. If we do not ensure that we are standing by them, that we are donating to the churches and causes that help uphold this woman needs resources to take care of her family. She, as one woman, could be the one to help us break. And I know I gotta be quiet, I get it, but this is important.
No, I didn't stop you.
She is the one, but you gave me the look. I know the look. We brother and sister. But she is the one officer who could potentially break this crisis that we have in New York of an oppressive police department. If we do not support when grassroots organizations say we need our people to come to the table, to donate resources, to stand up, to show up at our council meetings, and to stand up to, when it is time to vote, and make sure that we're not just voting for the person that comes and shakes the babies, but really those who have the policies in place to not just protect officers, but protect what it is that they're standing up for, then the problem is not the police officers, the problem is the people. We have to have a louder voice in this situation, and we have not, and I hope that that is what we come out with.
And that really doesn't just speak to the issue of officers. That speaks to how do we protect people in our community that step up and show up. I think what many have done around Colin Kaepernick, he hasn't asked for money because he's a millionaire, but he has had a level of support for stepping out in ways that I haven't seen a lot of artists do. And so whether we're doing that with police officers or not. So let me do this really quickly. I know there's some other remarks. Really quickly.
I have to say
really quickly.
It will be very quick.
Like 30 seconds.
It'll be less than that if you let me talk.
Beautiful.
Okay? There's a sister in
too much family in
Maryland, okay, named Marilyn Mosby, who stood
That's
up to the system. Right now, she's a main target for some crap, well, I didn't mean to say that word, for some stuff that's going on. If there's a time for the communities of all places to get together, to be supportive of someone who is in enforcement or in a position that looks at enforcement closely, this is the time. Remember her name, Marilyn Mosby. Find out, Google it. Y'all know how to do that a lot quicker than me.
No, that's right.
But do that.
City State's attorney in Baltimore, and if you don't know Freddie Gray, I don't know why you're in this room.
That's right.
Very quickly, please ask a question as quickly as you can. If you don't, I'll ask you to. One member of the panel answer, and we'll try to get as many of these questions answered as possible. Yes, sir.
Wonderful. My name is Vince Nichols. I'm the Director of Educational Services for my chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha. My question is this: for those in the trenches, and we are all dealing with apathy in our community, what are some of the messages that you all have used that you have found to be powerful? We've talked about leaving with meat, having the daytime be as instructive, better than what we do in the evening times. Give us some of those messages that you have found to resonate with the communities that we can possibly use to reach some of the success that you guys have
Appreciate
had.
that. If you all can give one line,
a
message that you're using to engage people.
That there is nothing self-executing about our rights and nothing that is inevitable about our progress. We have to step up and fight in this moment, band together, and push for what's right. It's on us. The agency, we've got the agency to make that change.
Okay, one line. Ask a simple question. Do you have someone in your family who has ever been to jail or taken into the system unjustly? You'd be surprised at the number of people that then will listen to what you have to say.
I would say intersectionality, that we have to care about issues that may not be our direct concern, but somehow it all ties back together. And I think that we should tell people it's not in a vacuum. If one community is under attack, all communities are under attack.
Congressman?
Always remind people that protesting without voting will probably lead to the same result that you're already in. In the state of Texas, in municipal elections, we talked about how chiefs of police are chosen by city council people. Less than 10%, normally it's about 5 or 6% of individuals vote on those Saturday elections, and non-presidential years to elect city council people and mayors.
That's right.
You can't get any change that way.
Brother Clarence.
Don't let your actions accidentally change the narrative. And I think that happens oftentimes, like in St. Louis right now. It's not about the acquitting of the officer. It's now about the riots. Nobody's talking about the acquittal.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, bail reform. I'm from New York City. 10,000 people held at Rikers Island. I need to know, how can we advocate, legislate, and be consistent with the Constitution that you should be able to make your bail. Many people are incarcerated because it's economic injustice. They don't have resources to get released.
Yes, ma'am.
We need to get rid of money cash bail, and we're going to do it in the next several years. And the good thing right now is in Congress, Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Rand Paul came together to push forward a really important bail reform bill. We need to get that passed. It needs to get, and the amazing thing right now is there are examples from the right and the left all over the country where they are eliminating cash bail, taking out the money profit motive.
Where are some of those examples?
So we've got, Kentucky has done it. We've got states like New Orleans, New Jersey has done amazing work right now. And we are seeing incarceration rates get lower. We need to make sure that we don't increase racial disparities when we're doing this work. But this is critically important work. We have criminalized poverty. We have criminalized race in this country. And bail reform is an important avenue. And that is one thing that is still alive and well here at the federal government. We've got to push for it, make our voices heard, and follow a ton of local movement and momentum on this issue. So we've got to build on that.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, hello, my name is Kayla Jones, and I'm a senior economics major, mathematics minor at Morgan State University. And my question is, what advice can you give to me as a young millennial who aspires to advocate for change in my community?
Tamika?
Are you involved in organizations?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, I mean, I think that that's number one, but I would ask that, since you said you're in Morgan State and you're all those great things, it would be awesome if you connect with me. So we could talk after this and figure it out.
Thank you. Reverend.
Also, in the case of Aaron Brazil, we found when we sued the insurance company that insured the police union, we got more results from our own city council members and our own state representatives. So just to the people, when you sue these insurance companies that insure these police officers, that insure these police unions, you will get more results than suing the state and the city officials.
I appreciate that pragmatic recommendation because you know you didn't ask a question, but I love it. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Sydney Arrington. I attend the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and I just wanted to know, what advice could you give the Black community that's facing racism on campus, being called the N-word, defacing property, and foremost, our administration keeps and constantly sweeps stuff under the rug. They just swipe it under, and they do not address issues or listen to us when we peacefully protest and march and come to them with solutions and demands.
Do y'all mind? As a former student government president at a predominantly white school down the road, I know about BAM 3. I know the history of University of Michigan, Black student mobilization, but Ann Arbor, like most institutions, will sweep under the rug what they can.
Right.
And so the issue is, how disruptive are you prepared to be? And how do you begin to build non-people of color allies, both on and off campus? And especially with Ann Arbor, I don't know if you've done this or not, there is an unbelievable opportunity with alums. There are alums that want to see transitions in Ann Arbor or wherever you go to school who write checks, who are actively involved in what's happening on the campus, even though they've been gone. They have tremendous power, and it becomes a chess game because there are alums that can call board members without having to be involved in a march. And there are corporate leaders in Ann Arbor that want to see things change that can call a board member without showing up at a march. How do you identify the full chessboard and continue to push pressure through your mobilization and your activism, begin to utilize both current alums and staff as backdoor intel, and keep up the pressure while they're pushing from the other side? Lastly, utilize the press to the best of your ability to communicate to potential students that this is not where they want to come under existing conditions. That immediately gets at least a meeting. Because that begins to threaten the lifeblood of the institution, which is tuition dollars and brand. And so if you can chop away at the brand of this bastion of liberalism in Ann Arbor called the University of Michigan and challenge it from a historical standpoint, because you can connect it from BAM 3 to today and the ebbs and flows, then you create a broader movement that is using data, metrics, strategy, and ensure that you have at least 3 asks that are incredibly specific, as opposed to we just want you to do better. Because if your asks aren't specific, they'll end up telling you what better is. Did I answer your question? Okay, and let me know if I can be helpful. Yes, sir.
1.0 to 4.0. Okay. My name's Trey, also known as John Harris III. I'm the founder of Authentic Reflection, Howard alum, DC resident. Shout out to the DC Statehood campaign. My question is, when I'm doing street ministry or whatever, every day, we find that civil rights seems almost, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's something like, how do you get someone to exercise their rights of being a human being instead of just needing permission to be civilized every day, as opposed to just when it's time to vote for something that they're just getting hustled on their vote anyway?
Great question.
So what is the best way for someone to exercise their civility, whether their rights are being respected or not?
Thank you so much. I want to get these last 2 questions in, then give the panel a chance to closing remarks.
Okay, my name is Winter Menasee. I am 16 years old. I'm the founder of Black is Lit, and my question is for the gentleman on my left. And so when you're talking about the riots and protesting as a minor who can't vote, and our civil engagement is a lot, like it's more so marching and protesting. And when there's a problems with your kneeling, and there's a problem if you're kneeling for the national anthem, there's a problem if you're marching in the streets and 2 people get violent, because that's what's going to be broadcasted. When you're peaceful, like what is the right way for youth to be involved in their communities and like have good civic engagement?
Thank you. Last question.
Yes, hello, my name is Lakeisha Davis Small, and I am from Washington, D.C. And my question is, I wanted to know if I can have a conversation with you, Tamika, because you are coming to D.C., and I am well connected with the clergy and a lot of different advocacy organizations, and I have too started a movement called Stop Stealing Our Souls, putting an end to sex exploitation, which is an issue within our communities as well. But what I wanted to say to the panel and to you also is that I was raised by a single father without my mother. She left in DC, Shaw community, drugs, crime, I done seen it all. Seen someone get shot in their head at 10 years old in front of my face, playing double dutch. But what I do know, and I just want to say for the world to know, no one can help us from us but us. I love y'all.
And because that wasn't the last question, but a comment, I'm going to let this brother get this last question.
Oh, thank you.
You good, sis.
So my question is, when we're talking about, first off, my name is Ron Young. I'm actually a student in Kentucky, but I've done some work with the NAACP. When we talk about infrastructure, is the need on the level of, do we need to develop another Cato Institute or another Heritage Foundation for us and our issues? And if that's what we need to move towards for sustainability and for infrastructure, how do we go about that to start that movement? Or is that the way to go, or do we need to support the organizations that are already doing that? Or do we need those systematic and legislative pieces?
Got your question. So is it either or both and? And I think we can all say it's both and, but if any of you want to address the question of institutions that we need to develop, and then we have somebody that wants to meet with Tamika, which is fine, and then I think if you all can, in your remarks, just begin to address, I think, the root of one of the questions that the young lady mentioned, which is about resilience in the midst of the movement. And not allowing anybody to define for you where you stop and start. Is that all right if I modified it that way? I appreciate the question, and I appreciate you being 16 and being here. Absolutely. God bless you. So if you all want to address that or anything else in 2 minutes of your closing remarks, and we'll start, Brother Clarence, and come down.
First of all, I invite you to visit the Noble website. We've posted just recently some things to expect when you protest from us as cops, and what we should expect from you as protesters that we think will keep you safe. That was in conjunction with the civil rights attorneys here in DC, I think that you obviously have the right to protest and nobody should not protect you. And I think that as you do those things, you should visit the history of our forefathers in the way that they protest. That's what I'm looking for as a leader. That's what I would recommend to my kids. You know, keep the nonviolence down. And I think you won't change the narrative, because you don't want your issues to turn into mass destruction of a community. And the fact that we have to borrow money from folks that don't look like us, and sometimes our communities are not rebuilt, is an injustice to our community when we go and destroy them.
Thank you. Congressman?
Thank you very much. First, I just want to very quickly address the young lady from University of Michigan. I'm not exactly sure why we continue to send our kids to school, to make these schools millions and millions of dollars to play basketball and shoot hoops, because the SAT score, incoming SAT scores, are directly tied to how much time they get on ESPN and how much they get on national TV. So, you know, I think that we should definitely be looking at that. And the second thing that I would say is to the young lady, you have to keep organizing. You know, our First Amendment, it was made to protect speech that was unpopular. And so even if you are doing something that people don't like, or it's unpopular, or the local police don't like it, you still need to get out there and organize and make sure that you're doing your part that you're doing, because you're going to be the next wave of leaders out there. And when we start talking about these, you know, low municipal election turnout results that we see over and over, that directly reflect who our next police officers and police chiefs are, you can have an impact on that. Make sure that you continue to chronicle it. Right now you're recording. Make sure you continue to do that. And so when they say it wasn't a peaceful protest, that you can show on your iPhone and to the world, on YouTube, on whatever social media space that you like, that to the contrary, that it was peaceful and that you were following the law, but continue to exercise your right to organize and assembly, because we need you out there, and we don't need for you to get discouraged.
Thank you. Tamika?
I think that most of the protests that I've been involved in, probably 99.999% of them have been peaceful, if that's what you want to call it. I don't think you should allow anyone to define that narrative for you. And you have to actually ignore that, because the reality is that militarized police officers in our community is what creates the violence. People don't just walk outside and decide they're going to start breaking windows. That's not real, right? This is happening because there is no justice in our communities, and we are going up against a machine that is there to intimidate and to create tension that ultimately spills over into the violence that you see. So I would really try to block that out. Of course, when you're organizing, we always talk to people about the principles, the Kenyan nonviolence principles, which says that when we go out, we're not going out to attack people, but rather the systems of oppression. And as long as you carry that with you, even when something happens, because the truth of the matter is that I look at a lot of gatherings of other communities that are way off the hook. And it's not even being talked about in the way that one brick being thrown is being discussed in our communities. That is being done to distract you. It's not that anyone is taking their eyes off the ball. It's that people do not want to deal with your issues. And so they want to use this peaceful thing and put that on you as an attempt to stop you from being focused on the real issues. So what you need to know is that if you choose activism, it's hard. And you're going to come up against people who look like you, who are going to tell you you're wrong, and other people that are going to be pushing against you on the other side. The reality is it's always been this way, and we have no choice but to continue to push, because our lives and our children's lives depend on it. And that's all I can say to you, sister. It's going to be difficult, but you just have to keep going, because you got black girl magic and you can make it happen.
Yeah. Very quickly, I'd like to address the brother who does the street ministry. I hope you're still here in the room. First of all, it's incredible that you are here in the room and at that mic. Let me salute you for doing that. We need advocates. We as a people need advocates in every entity of our being. And we need to understand that we've got to be supportive of every entity of our being. You are doing good work. Don't let anybody discourage you. How do you get the support to bring in that way? Call people out just like you're doing right now. Know the mechanisms that are at your disposal. You can call a press conference as well as anybody else. Learn the names of the reporters that are on your television stations. Give them a phone call, and if they don't show up, call them out on your issues and when you do your street ministry. And call some of these old line organizations out to make them show up to be supportive of you. We are still one people, and we will be black all day long.
Thank you. Anita?
You know, one of the big things that I think you heard from all of us today is the importance of showing up for each other right now. And there is so much energy and intentionality in building community, but the answer lies with us. We cannot sit back and just criticize or talk about the problem. There are a lot of problems right now, but we've got to be able to stand up and show up for each other. The same anti-immigrant agenda trying to destroy the lives of 800,000 young people, young immigrants who came to this country, know no other country as their home but us, that is directly tied to the same mass prison industrial complex around criminalization of our communities, of black and brown communities, the criminal justice reform issues, the voting rights issues. All of these issues are deeply connected, and this administration gets that. When you're seeing folks and officials tweet out and condemning the violence in Charlottesville, but advancing a voter suppression agenda every day of their lives, advancing an agenda that seeks to derail criminal justice reform and keep people in prison. The answer lies with us to organize locally, to organize for federal change, to organize in our communities, and that's where the hope is. Being a civil rights lawyer, being a civil rights advocate, and believing in an inclusive and fair country requires a deep, deep reservoir of hope. Somebody said the other day that hope is a discipline. You don't just kind of wake up and have it be inevitable. We have to work on that, and that's got to drive the change that we wish to seek.
Yeah.
Let me say thank you so much to our entire panel, because nobody addressed the last brother's question about infrastructure. I will say this, brother, the movement needs to be sustained, and what sustains it is institutions. I'm not saying that we need to model other people's institutions, because in many cases they just stole stuff from us. The question is, how do we look at what our needs are to turn the needle on the issues we care about, and where are the gaps and opportunities that we need to be able to do that? And so if it's research and data, then yes, we need institutions for research and data. If it's sustained media and engagement, not just organic social media, then we need sustained strategic media engagement. We need policy development, not just policy activism and response. I'm confused about why we have so many brilliant legislators that aren't authoring and co-authoring more policy and forcing people to say no to it or fighting it within the legislative levels. We need infrastructure that's candidate incubators. So to Congresswoman Waters' point, the people who are interested and have a fire for wanting to be in politics can be trained to. We have to train people to understand where their gifts lie. I'm tired of seeing legislators run for management positions when they can't manage nothing.
Hello?
Anyway, and so how do we do talent scouting, talent supporting, and talent incubation? All of those can be programs, but they're sustainable when they become institutional infrastructure. So to answer your question, yes, we need all of them. Because if our movement is going to be real, there is no community stronger than the institutions designed to serve it. Just look at the Jewish community. Just look at other communities. Every institution they have is designed to ensure their power. We hope power comes and get mad when we don't get it, as opposed to building infrastructure that ensures 20 years from now we have more power than we do. I appreciate everybody that stayed from beginning to end. I appreciate those that had to leave. I appreciate those of you that have been involved in this work. Appreciate the panel for providing pragmatic recommendations and even healthy debate. We are all family, and we got to get to the same place, but we only get to that place by work. So thank you all. Continue on your ALC. Have a great conference, and make sure you leave with something you are going to do. Give this panel one more round of applause, and have a great afternoon.
All's my life I has to fight. All's my life hard times like, yeah.